The humid air of Puerto Asís hung thick as Colombia's President Gustavo Petro stepped onto the stage, the weight of crisis visible on his face. Cameras clicked, the military brass stood still, and behind him lay a ceremonial pile of decommissioned weapons, a symbolic gesture of peace, now overshadowed by fears of war. Petro's words cut through the quiet. There is an open issue that can only be addressed within the United Nations, and that already has as close consequences a possible invasion of the Republic of Venezuela. Those lines, delivered with a deliberate calm, sent a tremor through Latin America. For months, tensions between Washington and Caracas had been rising, but this, the Colombian leader, warning of a possible invasion, transformed whispers of confrontation into a global alarm. Only days earlier, a string of deadly US naval strikes in the Caribbean and along Venezuela's northern coast had left at least 27 people dead. The Pentagon called the targets drug-running vessels. Caracas called it an act of aggression. And now, the man standing on Colombian soil, the neighbor of the embattled state, was voicing the region's deepest fear, that the crisis was spiraling toward open conflict. Petro's warning came just hours after US President Donald Trump publicly confirmed that he had authorized covert CIA operations inside Venezuela. In Washington, Trump framed it as a necessary measure against what he called narco-terrorism disguised as government. But in South America, those words landed like thunder. Petro, who has often positioned himself as both critic and mediator, tried to walk a tightrope. He distanced himself from Nicolas Maduro's government, stating bluntly, "I am not very supportive of the policies implemented by the current government in Venezuela because I do not recognize it." But even as he criticized Caracas, he drew a red line for Washington. If missiles fall there, or if a violent activity by CIA agents begins on the ground, that is my responsibility because what happens there affects Colombia. His tone was that of a man trying to contain a fire already burning on his doorstep. The crowd, military officers, ex-combatants and local civilians listened in tense silence. In the background, Defense Minister Pedro Sanchez took to the podium, trying to anchor the ceremony back to its original purpose, the destruction of seized war material. He spoke about Colombia's long battle against the cocaine trade, its toll on rural communities, and its role in fueling the violence now echoing across borders. Coca is an ancestral tradition, he said, but when it turns into cocaine, it becomes a poison that kills. The symbolism was not lost. As Sanchez spoke of poison, Petro was warning of another kind, the poison of intervention, of war returning to a region that had fought so hard to escape it. For years, Colombia's southern frontier with Venezuela has been a delicate line, a place of refugees, smugglers, and overlapping conflicts. More than 2 million Venezuelans have crossed that border seeking safety and opportunity since their own nation plunged into economic ruin. Colombia absorbed them, often with limited resources but remarkable resilience. Yet now, Petro fears that the same border could become the fault line of a new international crisis. In Washington, the Trump administration insists its actions are justified. The White House claims that Venezuelan naval units were escorting drug smuggling convoys and that the strikes were limited, precise and proportionate. Trump himself went further, boasting during a campaign rally that the operation had sent a clear message to the Maduro cartel. But the deaths, 27 confirmed, including fishermen and crew members from neighboring Guyana, have triggered outrage across the hemisphere. Brazil called for restraint, Mexico urged dialogue, and the United Nations demanded verification of the alleged targets. For Petro, a former guerrilla who once fought against US-backed forces, the irony is heavy. His presidency was built on reconciliation, peace with rebels, reform of the drug war, and regional diplomacy. Now he finds himself confronting the shadow of a conflict not of his making, but one that could easily consume his country. The Colombian leader's statement was not only a warning, it was also a message of sovereignty. Only within the United Nations can this issue be handled, he stressed, evoking international law as both shield and hope. In essence, Petro was reminding the world that the Latin American continent has its own history with intervention, from the Bay of Pigs to Panama to the coup years, and that it has never ended well. Inside Caracas, the response was defiant. Venezuela's acting president, Nicolas Maduro, took to national television that same night, calling Petro a brother in Latin America and thanking him for his prudence. But Maduro also vowed that Venezuela would defend its sovereignty with all available means. His defense ministry placed air defense systems on high alert and ordered the mobilization of naval patrols near La Guaira and Puerto Cabello. Images on Venezuelan state television showed soldiers assembling rocket launchers, radar systems scanning the sky, and civilian militias drilling in city squares. For a population exhausted by years of crisis, the images stirred both fear and national pride. Across the Caribbean, US Navy vessels maintained a visible presence, part deterrent, part signal. The Pentagon released aerial footage of what it described as successful interdictions of armed boats linked to transnational criminal networks. Yet analysts questioned the timing. Why escalate now, just months before US elections and amid renewed diplomatic talks over sanctions relief? In Bogotá, political reactions were split. Opposition lawmakers accused Petro of playing into Maduro's propaganda. Supporters praised him for defending Colombia's sovereignty and regional stability. Editorials in major Colombian newspapers warned of a dangerous vacuum of diplomacy, a situation where Washington's unilateral actions could undo years of progress in Latin American cooperation. At the Organization of American States in Washington, Colombia's ambassador requested an emergency session to discuss the strikes and their implications. Several Caribbean nations joined the call, arguing that the United States had acted without consultation. The session ended without consensus, but the divisions were clear. Latin America was once again being forced to choose sides. Beyond the rhetoric, the human cost is growing. In the Venezuelan border town of San Antonio del Táchira, hundreds of families have begun moving northward, fearing clashes between Venezuelan troops and US forces. Local reporters describe scenes of buses filled with families carrying plastic bags of belongings, mothers clutching babies, and men whispering that the war is coming. In Washington, the Trump administration has doubled down. The president told reporters, "We are not invading Venezuela. We are cleaning up a narco state that kills our people with drugs." But inside the CIA, sources speaking to the international press confirmed that operations on the ground are indeed underway, including intelligence gathering, infiltration, and coordination with dissident military groups opposed to Maduro. This revelation, partly confirmed by Trump himself, has alarmed not just Venezuela, but Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico. The fear is that if covert action escalates into open confrontation, the entire region could be drawn in, willingly or not. Petro's dilemma is particularly acute. Colombia's armed forces cooperate closely with the United States under existing security agreements. Yet if US forces were to use Colombian bases or airspace to launch operations in Venezuela, it would risk dragging Bogotá directly into conflict. That is the nightmare Petro is trying to avoid. In Puerto Asís, the symbolism of the moment is striking. A ceremony meant to celebrate peace, the destruction of weapons from decades of civil war, became the setting for a warning about new wars. Former FARC commander Walter Mendoza sat in the front row, once an enemy of the Colombian state, now a participant in peace. His presence reminded everyone how fragile peace can be and how easily violence can return when the powerful act without restraint. The cameras captured Petro leaning toward his defense minister, exchanging brief, tense words. At one point, the president looked down, his expression momentarily weary, a leader caught between loyalty to allies and loyalty to principle. When he finally spoke again, his tone softened. "I know what can happen in Colombia. That is my responsibility." That line resonated across Latin America, not only as a statement of national duty, but as a broader plea for sanity. Because in this hemisphere, the scars of intervention are deep. From Chile to Nicaragua, from Haiti to Grenada, the pattern is familiar. Great powers justify their actions in the name of stability, and smaller nations bear the cost. International reaction has been swift. The European Union called for restraint and a return to dialogue under UN mediation. The African Union issued a rare statement urging non-interference in sovereign nations. Even China weighed in, accusing Washington of reviving Cold War tactics in Latin America. At the United Nations in New York, the Security Council convened a closed-door session. Russia and China backed Venezuela's call for an investigation into the US strikes, while France and the United Kingdom urged transparency and restraint. The US delegation, meanwhile, insisted that all actions were in accordance with international law. As these debates unfold, Colombia finds itself once again at the crossroads of global geopolitics, a country that has known both American aid and American pressure, both insurgency and diplomacy. For Petro, the challenge now is to keep Colombia from being pulled back into the vortex of conflict that it's spent decades trying to escape. Back in Puerto Asís, as the ceremony concluded, the audience stood for a moment of silence. The sounds of the Amazon forest filled the gaps between applause and unease. Soldiers saluted, cameras lingered on Petro's face, and then, quietly, he turned and left the stage, his message already echoing far beyond that humid border town. Tonight, in capitals across the world, analysts are asking, is Latin America on the brink of a new confrontation? Is the US preparing for a campaign reminiscent of past interventions, or is this a calculated show of force aimed at deterrence, not invasion? What's clear is that the lines are blurring between anti-narcotics operations and military aggression, between sovereignty and security, between peace and provocation. And as history often reminds us, in Latin America, those blurred lines have a way of leading to consequences far greater than anyone intends. From Puerto Asís to Caracas, from Washington to Geneva, the world is watching closely and holding its breath.